Hey everyone, this is Adriano Peta from World Geopolitics. What if I told you Brazil has a serious problem? Just one issue. Everything else is perfect. The fact is, we have. Actually, it's a problem that comes from two other problems, right? But what is it that we have? On one hand, we have an excess of lawyers, and on the other hand, a huge glaring shortage of engineers. And before you, who are a lawyer, see this and start getting mad, already want to curse me out, already typing a bunch of insults at me, etc., calm down, hold on. What I'm actually trying to say is that this excess of lawyers is even hurting you who are a lawyer. Because it's not just overloading the market with professionals who, for the most part, aren't even that good. So it ends up getting in your way, devaluing your work. Plus, a lot of things that could be resolved. Without the courts, without the movement of the judiciary, which is already not a great example of efficiency, it ends up making the judiciary even slower because of the excess of cases. So you, as a lawyer, end up being a victim of this. But there's another point to this, which is the issue of the shortage of engineers, because engineers are the foundation of a civilization's development and research, as well as being responsible for industrial development. So, we have this issue. On one hand, we have this excess of lawyers, which means a bigger, more bureaucratic and slower state. And on the other hand, a very limited capacity for innovation, development, research, and practical application of these theories. In the industrial sector, all of this is a problem, especially for us here in Brazil, and I'll explain this in more detail and why it's a problem in today's video. But before that, don't forget to subscribe and share the video with everyone you know to help the Geopolítica Mundial channel keep growing. It may not seem like it, but every time you share the channel with your whole family, your boss, even your dog, it helps. Because the channel is practically being ignored. It was swept under the rug by YouTube, so your support by sharing the video is really important. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe too, right? And leave a comment, a like. So we can also see if we can eventually break this YouTube blockade, alright? My name is Deleon Peta and this is the World Geopolitics channel, World Geopolitics. Since the year 2000, Brazil has gone through an expansion of higher education. This Workers' Party policy aimed to create people with college degrees. First, to create an electorate grateful for finally having access to higher education, and second, to be able to show inflated statistics of the increase in graduates. Of course, investment in education is always something that is welcome, but the prioritization was aimed at the short term and focused on electoral gains, not bringing real benefits. Without an actual organic strategy that would truly improve the country's educational standards, including prioritizing higher education over basic education, and possibly destroying any positive future prospects for the country for the rest of the entire century. It may sound like an exaggeration, but I'm not talking about things that are extremely deep and rooted in our system and our culture. The first was the desperate expansion policy, through the creation of federal institutions and funding for very low-quality educational conglomerates, focused only on printing diplomas and not on real qualification. The second was an overload of graduates in the market which, even if they weren't necessarily qualified, devalued the value of qualified labor due to oversupply. The third is that prioritizing higher education over basic education created an even worse educational standard than it already was, creating a cycle where increasingly less educated young people reach higher education and where in turn the institutions. In order to keep these students, they need to lower the requirements in assessments, putting even less qualified professionals into the market than the previous generation. And finally, the fourth, a gigantic discrepancy, a huge discrepancy between the fields of knowledge, courses in human sciences and applied social sciences. The so-called humanities areas have grown in an exaggerated way, being the priority of the government and these large conglomerates due to their low cost. Meanwhile, the areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the so-called science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, have fallen behind in participation. Studies indicate that, in the mid-2010s, about 75% of the degrees issued in the country were in the humanities, compared to only 10% in exact sciences courses. This disproportion is in part cultural, a reflection of the damn Portuguese bachelor's heritage, which has historically valued law courses. Because of the social status they confer in society and the way they praise the unproductive career in government positions, The three most sought-after college courses in 2013 and still today are in the humanities, and they are precisely the ones that have the lowest cost for institutions and the lowest entry requirements, which are business administration, law, and education. And although the percentage of graduates in Einstein has increased a little, it is estimated that this accounts for only 17.5% of Brazilian graduates. Currently, it's an absolute domain of the humanities. Courses in the areas of law and administration together represent about 36% of Brazilian graduates, well above the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development average, which is 24%. In contrast, engineering and technical fields account for a small share. Between 2014 and 2020, for example, there was a 44.5% drop in enrollments in in-person engineering courses at private universities in the country. A dramatic reduction that deepens the shortage of technical professionals. And if you think this isn't a problem, take a look at the ranking of the countries we call world powers, or at least those that have some prospect of growth in the future. And you'll see that, when we compare with these nations, Brazil's imbalance becomes glaring. It's evident in practically all the major world economies. The participation of the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field in higher education is greater than in Brazil, starting with the United States, which, by the way, is the lowest, with approximately 20% of American graduates being from the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field. In absolute numbers, the United States graduates about 820,000 professionals in this field per year. In China, which is on the rise, there is a notable huge investment in technical areas. More than 40% of Chinese graduates are in these fields and universities. This translates to about 3.5 to 4 million science, technology, engineering, and mathematics graduates annually. And if you think this means only quantity and not quality, you are completely mistaken. Chinese universities have been rising in international rankings for their quality, and today China is a benchmark in technological advancement, being decades ahead of us in this regard, leading the training of engineers and scientists and reaping the rewards in the form of leadership. In high-tech sectors such as artificial intelligence, biotechnology, clean energy, and so on, India, on the other hand, closely follows China in volume, with about 34% of Indian students graduating in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, which results in approximately 2.5 million graduates per year in the field. This large base of engineers and specialists has fueled the boom in India's information technology and engineering sector, making the country a global hub for software development and technology services. Projections indicate that by 2020, India will likely surpass China in the number of graduates in these science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. Given the size of its young population in the European Union, it's obvious that this will vary from country to country. But overall, they all produce more science, technology, engineering, and mathematics professionals than Brazil. Germany, for example, has about 36% of its graduates in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, reflecting its strong culture and tradition in engineering. Meanwhile, England and France have around 25% to 26%. Even in Spain, we have something around 23%. In other words, the main European economies dedicate between a quarter and a third of their degrees to science and technology, well above the Brazilian level. Russia inherited a strong focus on exact sciences from the Soviet era. Today, about 29% of Russian university degrees are in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field, placing the country among the top 4 producers in this area. And in this direction, we can also highlight Iran and Indonesia. Japan. We don't have an exact and official figure, at least not one that I could find. Traditionally, it maintains a high level of education in engineering and sciences. Along with other advanced Asian economies, international reports usually include Japan among the 7 countries with the highest number of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics graduates in the world. Its proportion of graduates in technical fields is comparable to that of leading European countries, reflecting the central role of engineering and technology in the Japanese economy. For example, South Korea, another Asian powerhouse, records more than 40% of its degrees in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field, indicating that Japan is in this high range of dedication to science. The correlation is clear and undeniable. Well-established or rising countries have a strong presence of graduates in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field. And a remarkable and unpleasant factor in Brazil is the explosive growth of humanities courses, especially law. The country has reached a unique level in the world, having more law schools than all other countries combined. Altogether, there are more than 1,800 law courses currently registered, a number that keeps growing. To give you an idea, in 2018 there were about 1,500 law courses in Brazil, showing rapid expansion, and today there are already hundreds more. In comparison, it is estimated that in the rest of the entire world there are about 1,100 law courses. In other words, Brazil alone has more law schools than the United States, China, Europe, and the rest of the world combined. Literally a disaster greater than any natural disaster that could befall the country. This proliferation of humanities courses has also resulted in a huge number of graduates in these fields, devaluing the market itself. The Brazilian Bar Association, the Ordem dos Advogados do Brasil, counts more than 1.4 million active lawyers in the country, or approximately one lawyer for every 164 inhabitants, the highest ratio in the world. And this number could be even higher, since the Ordem dos Advogados do Brasil exam is at least an eliminatory filter. Since there is a backlog of more than 3 million law graduates who have not joined the bar and therefore do not officially practice as lawyers. In other words, millions of people graduated in law but do not practice the profession, often due to low quality of education or market saturation, which ends up pushing them into other fields. And even if the percentage that passes through the filter is small, proportionally speaking, the overall numbers are still extremely high, devaluing the legal profession itself. A similar situation occurs in other humanities and applied social sciences careers, such as business administration and pedagogy, which have attracted many students in recent decades. The education sector, especially teaching degree programs, also grew a lot to address the shortage of teachers in public education. For many years, pedagogy has been the third most sought after course, and it is already at a saturation level in several regions and levels of the country. And, as is often the case, quantity always comes at the expense of quality. The training of pedagogues in Brazil, in general, is quite deficient. Additionally, there's the major issue of harmful, outdated ideologies influencing these professionals' training. Who will then spend the whole day with these children, influencing their education? And this imbalance will bring colossal economic consequences and impacts to Brazil. Because, while there is a shortage of engineers to carry out infrastructure and technology projects, Brazil produces a surplus of graduates in legal and administrative fields, which are generally unproductive or even hinder the productive sectors. And this will translate into an economic and productive problem. The predominance of graduates in the humanities, to the detriment of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, brings concrete, real losses to the Brazilian economy, both in the short and long term. The first and most obvious is the shortage of professionals in strategic sectors, with a lack of engineers, scientists, and qualified technicians, creating bottlenecks in several areas. Sectors such as infrastructure, manufacturing, information technology, and energy suffer from a lack of specialized labor. A survey by the National Confederation of Industry estimated in 2023 that Brazil had an immediate shortage of 75,000 engineers to meet existing demands. Considering the demographic crisis and the deglobalization, this will bring stagnation, innovation, and productivity. Modern economies are driven by high-tech and innovation sectors, which rely heavily on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics professionals. By not prioritizing education in technology and engineering, Brazil compromises its competitiveness in a much more hostile world. Brazil's contribution in key technological areas, for example, is small compared to other nations. What could condemn us to depend on importing increasingly basic technologies and know-how in terms of productivity? Having a large part of the qualified workforce concentrated in administrative or legal areas, which has a pathetically minimal effect on the creation of new scalable products and services, limits the aggregate efficiency gains of the economy. And just a quick note here, which is about the United States. They train few people in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field because on one hand, they graduate few people in this area. But they have the ability to attract professionals from other countries who are trained in this area, so even though they initially graduate few professionals in this field, they manage to make up for it by attracting people from other countries. So they end up having in their market a good supply of professionals connected to this area, so they end up balancing that out. In this matter of the lack of engineers that they should originally have, which is not the case in Brazil. Brazil is not an attractive country, especially for qualified labor. For unqualified labor, it's somewhat attractive depending on where it's from. But for qualified labor, which is the workforce we need for the 21st century, that unfortunately we are not attractive for, so it's a serious problem for Brazil. This will result in unemployment and underutilization of qualified labor. Because this excess of graduates in saturated fields leads many to fierce competition for jobs or positions. There are those who, despite their qualifications, in law for example, thousands of graduates are unable to pass the bar exam or cannot find a place in the traditional legal market even after passing the exam. What pushes them into other careers or even other jobs? The result is a waste of educational resources and talent. People with degrees who end up not contributing productively in the field in which they graduated. Besides, after years of personal and state educational investment, they do not turn into economic returns. When the graduate is unable to use these skills, this phenomenon also puts downward pressure on salaries in overcrowded fields, further discouraging individual productivity. And this results in something even worse, which is the establishment of a culture of litigation and bureaucratic obstacles. It's ironic how the country with the most expensive judiciary in the world and the most lawyers in the world is actually considered a reference. Injustice and an absurd slowness in judicial proceedings. It's possible to point out that the excess of legal professionals can create obstacles in the business environment. In Brazil, with so many lawyers and law graduates, over time there's a tendency to take any conflict to court, no matter how small or pathetic it may be. In the words of a CNJ counselor, anything is a reason to go to court. In other words, society gives even more room for authoritarianism, letting the state dictate the rules of how it should behave in its own life. This reflects a legal education that still emphasizes litigation instead of mediation or quick solutions. The economic effect is a highly litigious society, with companies and individuals spending a lot of time and money on lawsuits over trivial matters. With bureaucracy becoming increasingly burdensome and with decisions taking a long time in the courts and the judiciary, the most expensive and inefficient on the planet, maybe even in human history. In short, the abundance of legal professionals means more laws, regulations, and mostly useless lawsuits, raising the so-called Brazil cost and getting in the way of those who truly create wealth. These resources, which could go toward productive investments, bringing more jobs and improving the population's quality of life, end up being consumed by legal battles and bureaucratic procedures. Instead of having a larger share of young talents dedicated to creating technologies, scientific research, or cutting-edge engineering, we end up directing them en masse to courses with less productive impact, or sometimes to fields that produce nothing and even hinder those who do. Countries like China and India have experienced accelerated growth precisely by directing millions of students into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics careers, who later contributed to industrialization, infrastructure expansion, and the digital revolution. In these nations, and in Brazil, the current imbalance shows that we will fall behind in the so-called knowledge economy, losing ground in global value chains. Because there aren't enough specialists in technical fields. Well, folks, that's it. So I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you subscribed, I hope you shared, and consider becoming a member. The channel only exists because of the members. Because, believe it or not, the amount YouTube pays this channel is pathetically small. I've even compared it with other channels. So, probably world geopolitics is down there in the basement, just hidden away. On top of that, the channel's monetization is very small, so it's thanks to the members that this channel simply exists. Will you consider becoming a member? That way you make sure the channel exists. In return, you get benefits like early video access, exclusive videos, and live streams. Your name is shown here as thanks, and with certain membership tiers, you can vote on the channel's next video. So, consider that. It really helps a lot, and if you can't become a member because of some obstacle, just sharing already helps a lot. Alright then guys, that's it. Thank you very much. Hugs and see you in the next video.